Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we step into the cool pre-dawn hush of ancient Rome. The city just stirring as you draw your cloak tighter around your shoulders. You smell the sour warmth of fresh bread wafting from a street baker's oven. Hear the clatter of iron-shod cartwheels bouncing over paving stones, and see a pale streak of light just beginning to leak across the Tiber. Mary Beard stands beside you in her trademark scarf, grinning like she's about to show you something slightly scandalous. "This is no monolithic marble wonderland," she says with a conspiratorial whisper. "This is messy, noisy, dazzling Rome, an empire so sprawling you probably won't survive this tour without tripping over someone's goat. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments, because it's oddly comforting to imagine this story rolling across time zones like a Roman road. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge behind Mary into the forum, and it feels like stepping into the living heart of a beast. Dawn fog coils around columns, the marble glowing faintly pink in the growing light, and everywhere the smell of last night's hearth fires still lingers. A mule brays somewhere, and a vendor already yells about figs that are definitely too expensive. You pause to take it all, and this city is awake long before it has any right to be, and realize that the empire itself is a kind of perpetual dawn. It's always beginning somewhere, stretching its limbs, swallowing new lands, new people, new ideas. Mary sweeps her hand wide, taking in the sight of senators, heading for the curia, and street kids trying to pickpocket them. "This," she says, "is where the whole complicated, contradictory thing starts every day. Don't think of Rome as a single place, think of it as 1,000 voices speaking at once." As you follow her down a side street, you notice the sheer variety of faces around you. Dark-skinned men with North African cloaks, pale Gauls with wiry red hair, a Greek tutor scolding a boy in fluent Attic Greek, even a pair of Syrian traders carrying bolts of cloth, so colorful they almost hurt your sleepy eyes. Mainstream historians have often tried to present Rome as homogeneous, but here you see it in motion, a swirl of cultures you couldn't catalog if you had all day. Mary points at a painted sign over a tavern. Its lettering is Etruscan, not Latin, and raises an eyebrow at you as if to say, "See, this empire has always been a polyglot circus." You pass a temple just as its priest is waking the household gods with a bell, and the sound is joined by the slap of sandals as worshippers shuffle in. Somewhere farther off, you hear chanting that sounds decidedly Egyptian, an Isis cult welcoming the sunrise. The Romans may have conquered half the known world, but they seem equally willing to let the world sneak in through the back door. You can almost taste the mix of incense, smoke, and street dust, and it makes you cough and laugh at the same time. "They were good at stealing gods," Mary chuckles, "but they were even better at pretending those gods had been Roman all along." Is one of the problem at Swery. Down another street, you catch sight of soldiers. Not the pristine textbook kind, but men with dented helmets and dusty boots, their shields stacked against a wall as they dice for breakfast money. One of them has an accent so thick you barely recognize the Latin, and Mary leans in to tell you he's from Thrace, drafted from some distant frontier and now guarding the very heart of the city. This is your first reminder that Rome's might didn't run only on Roman blood, it ran on recruits from everywhere. The empire was stitched together by men who might never see the place they were technically serving, and yet here one is, spitting olive pits onto the ground and whistling as though he owns the street. You stop at a fountain, splashing your face with water that's startlingly cold, and Mary begins to tell you about the aqueducts. It's a story you think you know, arches marching across hills, water running downhill, but she adds a twist. Did you know that some of the most skilled aqueduct engineers weren't Roman citizens at all? Many were enslaved Greek specialists or even Jewish captives who became so indispensable that their masters freed them just to keep the water flowing. That detail makes you smile. Rome's very thirst depended on the expertise of the conquered. There's something perversely poetic about an empire needing its others just to take a morning bath. Somewhere near the Suburra, the smell shifts. Now it's wet laundry and lye from the fuller's workshops. You peek inside one and immediately regret it. A worker is stomping cloth in a vat of ammonia-rich liquid that makes your eyes water. "Yes," Mary confirms with a wicked grin, "that's urine. Collected from public jars on street corners. The emperor even taxed it at one point." You gag, but you can't help laughing. An empire this sophisticated still ran partly on pee. It's a reminder that this grand marble city is also deeply, stubbornly human. The sun climbs higher, and you notice the street is getting louder. A seller of African dates sings a rhyme to advertise. A philosopher starts an argument on a street corner. A couple argues about whose turn it is to buy oil for the lamp. Everything you see confirms that this empire, even in its capital, is never just Roman. It's Iberian, Syrian, Egyptian, Gallic, and everything in between. Scholars still can't quite agree whether this diversity was Rome's greatest strength or the seed of its collapse. Was it a clever machine for absorbing difference, or an unstable cocktail forever on the edge of boiling over? The thought makes you glance around nervously, half expecting a riot, but for now the city just yawns and stretches like a cat in the sun. Mary leads you up the Capitoline Hill for one last look before the day properly begins. From here, you can see rooftops spreading in every direction, the morning light catching on terracotta tiles, gilded temple statues, and smoke rising from 100 hearths. Beyond the walls, the roads vanish into the horizon, each one pointing toward provinces full of people you've yet to meet on this journey. You feel strangely small, but also thrilled. Ready? Mary asks, her eyes glinting with mischief. You nod, because you can already sense that this is going to be more than just a history lesson. It's going to be a tour through a world so tangled and alive you might never look at Rome, or empire, the same way again. You descend from the Capitoline into a world that sounds like a Tower of Babel, only somehow it works. By the time the sun is up, the streets are a choir of clashing syllables. You hear a baker shouting in Latin, but his customer answers in Greek. A pair of Phoenician traders mutter in their own tongue, and behind them, two women gossip in something that sounds almost like Celtic. You catch one word you recognize, Caesar, but the rest is as slippery as the morning mist. Mary grins, clearly delighted at your bafflement. This, she says, is Rome on an average day. Multilingual chaos, and yet the whole thing manages to function. The market you step into is the perfect laboratory for this experiment. Every stall is a mini embassy, piled with produce and personalities from the far edges of empire. The man selling olive oil calls out prices in Latin, but when a Greek customer approaches, he switches languages so fluidly you barely notice the code switch. You pass a spice dealer from somewhere near the Red Sea, and when you ask Mary what language he's speaking, she tilts her head. Could be Nabatean, could be Aramaic, could just be him inventing words to sound exotic enough to charge double. She winks, and you chuckle, because haggling seems like a universal language here. A scribe sits at the edge of the forum, stylus in hand, offering to write letters for the illiterate. You pause to watch him scratch on a wax tablet while a worried farmer dictates slowly. The words are Latin, but the man's accent is so thick you could cut it with a dull bronze knife. Mary leans close and explains that Rome never forced everyone to speak proper Latin, at least not in the sense you might expect. Instead, Latin seeped outward like dye in water, mixing with local dialects and creating whole new hybrid tongues. Linguists today still puzzle over graffiti in Pompeii that reads half Latin, half Oscan, and sometimes just phonetic nonsense. It makes you wonder whether anyone ever understood the notices posted in the forum, or if most people just nodded like you do when someone explains crypto. You follow the sounds toward a temple courtyard, where a crowd has gathered for some kind of public reading. A man in a toga stands on a platform, unrolling a scroll and declaiming in polished theatrical Latin about a senatorial decree. Half the crowd nods along, the other half look as blank as you feel. Mary mutters that this was as close as Rome got to public service announcements, but most people probably walked away, understanding 3 words at best. Imagine if your city council tweeted exclusively in Shakespearean English, she says. That was basically the vibe. In second, not a nine. As you wander away, you notice a wall plastered with painted advertisements, election slogans, apartment rentals, even a scrawled love poem in Greek hexameter meter. One line has been crossed out and corrected by a different hand, and Mary bursts out laughing. Someone was correcting the poet's grammar, she explains. Even 2,000 years ago, people couldn't resist being pedantic. The thought is oddly comforting. Some poor soul was a grammar troll before Twitter was even a concept. At a nearby fountain, a group of children play a clapping game that mixes Latin rhymes with what sounds like Egyptian words. You tilt your head, trying to parse it, and Mary watches with satisfaction. Those kids, she says softly, are the empire's future. By the time they grow up, Their speech will be something entirely new, neither the language of their grandparents nor pure Roman Latin. That's how empires change, not just by conquering land, but by braiding together the sounds people used to think. You duck into a tavern for a drink, and the noise nearly knocks you backward. The room is alive with shouting. Sailors from Alexandria boasting in Greek, a merchant from Gaul negotiating in broken Latin, a few soldiers laughing in a dialect you can't even place. When the owner brings you wine, you notice that his receipt tablet is written in neat Latin numerals, but sprinkled with abbreviations from some local shorthand. That's what makes this city hum, Mary says, sipping from her cup. You don't need to know every word, you just need enough overlap to do business, fall in love, and argue about taxes. One of the sailors gets up and begins singing in Greek, a bawdy tune judging by the reaction of the others. Soon the whole tavern joins in, some in Greek, some in Latin, some just humming along. You catch yourself smiling. This might be the one place on earth where you can be completely linguistically lost and still feel included. Mary elbows you gently, clearly pleased that you're loosening up. Outside again, the afternoon sun is hot now, and the air rings with yet more voices. A pair of traveling performers act out a skit, shouting their lines in a mixture of mime and broad Latin puns that make the crowd roar. You get about half the jokes, but that seems to be enough. Laughter is its own translation. As the performance ends, a woman nearby mutters a comment in Punic that makes the man next to her snort into his cup. Mary tells you that Roman authors complained bitterly about Punic speakers in Carthage, refusing to give up their language generations after the city fell. And yet, she adds slyly, archaeologists have found Punic graffiti right here in Rome. So much for total assimilation. Same brazen for he. The soundscape of Rome is almost a character of its own, alive, unpredictable, sometimes maddening. You pause to imagine what it must have been like to be a newcomer, stepping into this city for the first time with no Latin at all. Some must have felt utterly lost. Others probably thrilled at the chance to reinvent themselves with every borrowed word. Scholars keep arguing whether this linguistic mix created unity or confusion, but as you listen to a merchant curse fluently in two languages at once, you start to think the answer might be both. Maybe that tension between being understood and being gloriously misunderstood was exactly what kept Rome so restless, so alive. By late afternoon, the sun slants low, and the shouting begins to fade as shopkeepers close their stalls. You pass a group of scribes carrying wax tablets under their arms, chatting in a professional argot as dense as legalese. Somewhere, a street preacher calls out in Aramaic, his voice oddly musical against the dying noise. The day winds down, but the babble never really stops. It just softens into a background lullaby that follows you as you and Mary wander back toward the center. The city glows now, lit by torches and oil lamps, and for a moment the languages blur into one long, comforting murmur. You catch yourself thinking that maybe this was Rome's real magic, not its legions or its aqueducts, but its ability to let 100 tongues speak at once without tearing itself apart. You glance at Mary, and she seems to read your mind. Exactly, she says, almost whispering. This is what an empire sounds like. It's not silence, it's noise that somehow holds together. Morning light is sharper today, slicing through the narrow alleys and catching on the faces around you. Faces that feel like a living map of the empire itself. You follow Mary toward the forum again, and you can't stop staring. Everywhere you look, there are people who do not fit the one-size-fits-all image you've seen on marble busts. A man with dark Nubian skin carries amphorae on his shoulder, his gold earrings glinting in the sun. Two pale-haired women in Celtic tunics barter loudly with a vendor, their bracelets clattering like wind chimes. A boy whose skin is the color of polished bronze darts between them with a tray of pomegranates, shouting something that sounds half Latin, half Berber. It's as if the empire has opened its gates overnight and poured its provinces into one street for you to study. Mary notices your wide-eyed look and chuckles softly. We've been sold a myth for a long time, she says, nodding toward a senator's statue nearby. White marble, white toga, white Rome. But look closely at that nose. Those curls it once had paint, and the man himself probably had an olive complexion. The idea shocks you. You imagine all those austere marble statues suddenly blushing with life, their lips red, their hair glossy black or honey blonde, their eyes staring back in blue, brown, or green. It's almost unsettling, like realizing every textbook illustration you ever saw was left half-finished. As you make your way into the market square, The riot of colors continues, not just in skin tones, but in clothes and hairstyles. A woman from Dacia walks by with her hair braided into an intricate crown, and next to her, a Greek merchant wears his hair in ringlets that would not look out of place at a modern fashion week. Mary points out a Numidian horse trader whose cloak is dyed a brilliant saffron, a shade that must have cost a fortune. The empire didn't just tolerate difference, she says. It flaunted it. Being visibly from somewhere could be a status symbol. You watch a senator's wife pass, her stola trimmed with Egyptian linen, so sheer it might as well be a brag about her husband's trade connections. You duck into a barber shop, where a client sits, getting his beard trimmed, while another waits for a depilation treatment. The barber hums as he works, his tools clinking in a rhythm that almost sounds like music. You notice that on the wall are painted portraits of famous hairstyles. Some Roman, some Greek, some Eastern, and customers can apparently pick their look from a menu, like they're ordering takeout. The man in the chair chooses the Severin curls, and Mary whispers that fashion often spread outward from the capital faster than you might think. Within months of an emperor changing his hairstyle, men as far away as Britannia would be trying to copy it. You grin at the thought of a grizzled soldier in some rainy fort asking his barber to give him the emperor's latest fringe. The smells here are as telling as the sights. Whiffs of sesame oil from Syria, frankincense from Arabia, myrrh from Ethiopia. You pause near a perfume stall, where a woman in a purple veil dabs your wrist with something floral and heady. It clings to you as you walk, as though you're carrying a fragment of the province it came from. Even scent was a passport, Mary notes. You could smell a foreign visitor before you saw them, and sometimes that was the point. You imagine Roman streets as a perfumed map, each aroma marking a different point of origin. Near the forum's edge, a small crowd has gathered around a storyteller. His skin is dark and glossy, his teeth bright as he grins, and his hands move like birds as he acts out some fable involving a clever fox. The children squeal with delight, and you realize you're watching culture in transmission, one story hopping from Africa to Rome and now into your memory. We think of global storytelling as modern, Mary murmurs, but here it was an everyday performance. The man finishes with a flourish, bows, and receives a shower of coins, proof that his foreignness is not just accepted but celebrated. You wander into a nearby portico to escape the heat, and that's when you see a wall painting so vivid it stops you mid-stride. It shows a family, father, mother, children, posing proudly in front of a temple. Their skin tones are mixed, their clothes a patchwork of regional styles. You notice the father's ring is engraved with his citizenship, and Mary nods approvingly. That, she says, is what Rome looked like. Not a single face, but a collection. Archaeologists have found portraits in Egyptian tombs showing individuals with freckles, wrinkles, even slightly crooked teeth. The past, it turns out, is not airbrushed. As you sit on the cool stone steps, you notice a pair of freedmen arguing nearby. One with the heavy accent of the Danube region, and the other with a nasal Greek lilt. They're shouting about the price of olive oil, but the argument turns to jokes, and soon they're laughing so hard they nearly fall over. It's strangely heartwarming. You realize that this is what made the empire work, not just laws and legions, but strangers learning to live together, quarrel together, and sometimes drink together afterward. Mary points to a mosaic under your feet, depicting traders with camels, ships, and scrolls. Some of the figures are clearly not Italian. The artist has given them distinctive features, but not as caricature, just as fact. We still debate, she says, how Romans really saw this diversity. Was it curiosity, tolerance, snobbery? The answer might be yes to all three. She shrugs, smiling at the paradox. Humans are complicated, empires doubly so. As evening approaches, the golden light softens the features of the crowd, turning every face into a portrait. You find yourself watching them with a kind of reverence, as if they are actors in a grand drama, only half written. The diversity isn't just demographic, it's emotional. Some faces are weary, some eager, some scheming. You spot a boy staring at a soldier's sword with wide-eyed awe and a woman rolling her eyes at her husband's boastful story. The human variety is dizzying, and you begin to understand why Mary calls Rome a moving mosaic. Each piece has its own shape and color, but together they create a picture too large to see all at once. Night settles in, and torches flare to life, illuminating faces in flickering orange light. You linger for a moment longer, letting the sights and smells etch themselves into memory. You've spent a day simply looking, and yet you feel like you've traveled across continents without leaving the city. Rome, you realize, is not a static sculpture, it is a breathing, bustling, many-colored crowd. And as Mary leads you away, you can almost hear the stones themselves whispering that the story of this empire is the story of everyone who walked its streets, no matter where they were from. You wake to the clang of a bell and the faint smell of incense riding the morning air, and you realize you're being summoned to a city where the divine has never been a quiet business. Rome at dawn is already full of gods jostling for attention. You follow Mary down a street lined with shrines, each one glowing faintly in the half-light, and you notice that every doorway has its own tiny altar. Some hold simple offerings, bread crusts, a few figs, a splash of wine, while others look like miniature temples, complete with little painted statues of household spirits. The air is thick with smoke, spice, and muttered prayers. Religion in Rome, Mary says, wasn't about belief so much as participation. You were expected to keep the gods busy. As you move closer to the forum, the sheer number of divine options becomes dizzying. You pass a temple to Jupiter, towering and majestic, its steps swept clean for morning sacrifices. A priest in a toga praetexta carries a spotless white bull toward the altar, and the smell of fresh hay and iron tools makes your stomach twist with anticipation. Before you can linger, you're tugged toward another courtyard where a group of women sing hymns to Isis, their Egyptian sistrums rattling like metallic rain. The sound is hypnotic, exotic, and you catch yourself swaying with the rhythm before Mary laughs softly and pulls you onward. You could spend a whole day here, she remarks, and never pray to the same god twice. You turn a corner and almost collide with a group of Mithraic initiates, men in woolen caps, slipping into an underground temple lit by a single oil lamp. Mary lowers her voice and explains that Mithras was the darling of soldiers, a secretive cult promising salvation through ritual meals and cave-like initiations. It's strangely thrilling to imagine legionaries from as far away as Dacia or Armenia gathering here, bonding over shared mystery rites before heading back to the front lines. Historians still can't agree whether Mithraism was a true rival to Christianity or just a fashionable soldiers' club, but standing at the threshold, you feel the tug of its secrecy. The diversity of worship is so chaotic it almost feels competitive. One priest calls for silence, another bangs a drum, another parades an image of a goddess covered in gold leaf. You realize this is less like a Sunday service and more like a street festival where everyone is trying to outdo the other. A shrine to Bona Dea is decorated with garlands so heavy they nearly drag the statue forward, while across the way a new cult to a Syrian goddess has erected a gaudy banner advertising the next ecstatic dance ritual. Religious marketing, Mary smirks. It's not as modern as you think. The censor of Fleisling Hames of Creesell. You duck into a quiet side chapel, hoping for a moment of calm, but even here there is drama. On the wall is a painted inscription commemorating a man who donated money to restore the temple after a lightning strike. The language is boastful, almost competitive. He wants you to know that he saved this god's house and expects divine favor in return. It dawns on you that religion here isn't just piety, it's politics, reputation, even social climbing. Donate to the right god's temple, and you might climb a rung on the civic ladder. As midday heat rolls in, the smell of sacrifice thickens. Smoke rises from temple precincts, carrying the scent of roasting meat that makes your stomach growl despite yourself. Mary teases you. Yes, the gods got their share, but so did the priests, and sometimes the public. Think of it as the original community barbecue. You watch as a butcher divides up the remains of a sacrifice, handing cuts to waiting citizens. Suddenly religion feels far less lofty, and far more like a neighborhood potluck. You pause near a fountain, where an argument has broken out between two men. One insists on honoring the Capitoline Triad. The other claims Isis has granted him a vision. Their voices grow heated, hands waving, until a passerby cracks a joke, and everyone laughs. This is not the dour religious conflict you might expect. It's closer to a lively dinner party debate. Romans, you realize, had room for disagreement as long as everyone paid their ritual dues. That said, Mary warns you that the state could draw hard lines when it felt threatened. The Senate once banned Bacchic rites, fearing that their secret nighttime gatherings would lead to sedition. The crackdown was brutal, and yet within a generation Bacchus was back on the official calendar, proving that suppression had its limits. You wander toward the river, and find a modest temple dedicated to some obscure local deity whose name you can barely pronounce. The caretaker greets you warmly and offers a pinch of incense to toss on the altar. You hesitate, unsure of the etiquette. But Mary nods encouragingly. The smoke curls upward, and for a moment you feel connected to every person who ever stood here making the same gesture. Traders, soldiers, slaves, freedmen, children. Religion, you sense, was one of the few things that stitched together a world this vast. As the sun sets, the city seems to glow with 1,000 flickering lights, lamps before doorways, torches before temples, candles around little household shrines. You can hear singing drifting from one street and the distant sound of cymbals from another. The air smells of wine and myrrh, and somewhere a flute plays a plaintive tune. It strikes you that no matter what god a person prayed to, the rhythm of the day was the same. Dawn prayers, midday offerings, evening thanks. Rome might have been a religious free-for-all, but it was also synchronized, like an orchestra tuning itself every day. Mary leads you to a high terrace where you can see the whole city twinkling under the first stars. This, she says softly, is the empire at prayer. You think back on every shrine, every chant, every waft of incense, and realize that the diversity wasn't just tolerated, it was cultivated, as if Rome thrived on variety. Whether that made the empire stronger or left it vulnerable is still a matter of debate, but tonight it feels beautiful. The gods may have competed, but somehow their worshippers shared the same sky. You wake to the sound of boots, hundreds of them thudding on cobblestones in a steady, stomach-deep rhythm. The Roman army is already on the march, and you feel the ground tremble under your feet as you follow Mary toward the city gates. The soldiers pass in formation, shields slung over their backs, and you notice immediately that they do not all look like the marble reliefs you've seen in museums. One man is pale with freckles, another has skin as dark as polished chestnut, and yet another has a hooked nose and an accent you can't place when he shouts an order to the man next to him. "Meet the real Roman army," Mary says with a grin. A patchwork force stitched together from the far corners of the world. She leads you toward a military camp outside the walls where the smell of leather, sweat, and campfires hits you like a wave. You pass rows of tents and hear a chorus of languages, Latin mingling with Greek, Celtic, Punic, and something Mary tells you is Thracian. One soldier sharpens a sword while humming a tune that sounds suspiciously Egyptian, and another sits cross-legged, carving a little wooden horse and muttering prayers in his native tongue. The army, you realize, is less an Italian force and more a United Nations with javelins. You stop near a corral where Numidian cavalry are tending to their horses, sleek, fine-limbed animals with coats like burnished gold. The riders wear short tunics and ride without saddles, their ease in the saddle so fluid it's almost like dancing. Mary tells you that Rome relied heavily on auxiliaries like these specialist troops drawn from conquered peoples who brought unique skills. The archers from Syria, the slingers from the Balearic Islands, the camel riders from Arabia, each one added a tool to the Roman military machine. And when their 25 years of service were done, they were often rewarded with citizenship, making the army not just an engine of conquest but a conveyor belt turning outsiders into Romans. Nearby, a group of engineers are setting up a makeshift bridge across a ditch. You watch them measure, hammer, and lash timbers together with a speed that would put modern construction crews to shame. Mary leans in to whisper that some of the greatest Roman military engineers were not Roman-born at all. They were enslaved Greeks or provincial specialists who rose to prominence because their skills were too valuable to waste. You think back to the aqueduct builders you saw in the city, and realize that Rome's infrastructure and its army were fueled by the same thing, brains and muscle imported from everywhere. The midday sun is brutal, and you duck under the shade of a leather tent where a few soldiers are lounging. One is from Gaul, his hair pale as straw, and he's carving a little figure of a boar while telling a joke that makes the others laugh so hard they nearly spill their wine. Another soldier, darker skinned and wiry, chimes in with his own story, acting out the gestures of a market brawl in far-off Palmyra. It dawns on you that these men have not only fought together but eaten together, gambled together, shared wounds and victories. Their loyalty may not be to Rome, the abstract idea, but to each other. Mary points out that this camaraderie was exactly what the Roman state depended on. A legion was a family, she says. And, like a family, it could squabble, grumble, even mutiny, but in battle, it stuck together. You look at the scars on some of these men, the hardened expressions, the way their hands rest easily near their weapons even when they're relaxed, You get the sense that Rome's frontiers were held not by marble walls but by the trust and fear that bound these soldiers side by side. Later, you follow the sound of a trumpet toward a training field. There, you see a drill in progress, ranks of soldiers practicing formations under the shouting of a centurion. The sun glints off their helmets as they wheel, march, and lock shields with a precision that sends a shiver down your spine. In one corner, a unit of archers lets fly a volley of arrows that thud into straw targets. And in another, a medicus tends to a recruit who twisted his ankle. The whole scene feels like a living machine, every cog turning, every part replaceable, yet essential. You pause by a shrine where soldiers are leaving offerings, small coins, figurines, even a tiny bronze sword. Mary explains that each unit had its own standards and sacred symbols, and losing them in battle was considered the deepest shame. They fought for Rome, yes, she says, but they also fought for these bits of cloth and metal that told them who they were. One is a dound of Reicheness waif. By late afternoon, the camp smells of roasting meat and wood smoke. A cook ladles out a stew that smells of garlic and barley, and you're invited to share a bowl. The taste is earthy, simple, and surprisingly satisfying. One of the soldiers offers you a sip of sour wine, and you nearly choke at its acidity, but everyone laughs good-naturedly. The moment feels almost domestic, like sitting down to dinner with a rowdy extended family. But as dusk approaches, the mood shifts. A scout rides in with news from the frontier, and suddenly the camp is a hive of activity. Weapons checked, orders barked, helmets polished. You feel a twinge of unease. For all the camaraderie, this is still a war machine, and somewhere beyond the horizon, there are real enemies waiting. Mary catches your expression and nods gravely. This was the paradox, she says. The empire depended on these men, but it also feared them. A loyal army could defend Rome. A disloyal one could make or break emperors. This was of the wide of the word. From same endodalens, free flanks of the word and sided. You watch as the soldiers gather around a campfire, the flames throwing shadows on their faces. Some sing, some sharpen blades, some stare into the dark as though trying to see the future. The night air smells of smoke and sweat, and somewhere a horse snorts softly. You realize that this is the beating heart of the empire, not the marble forum or the senatorial debates, but these men, drawn from every corner of the known world, ready to march wherever the eagle standard leads them. Historians still debate whether this reliance on foreign recruits made the army stronger or sowed the seeds of Rome's later troubles. Did the empire create loyalty by offering citizenship? Or did it simply create an army full of men who might one day turn on the very city they defended? For now, the question hangs unanswered in the night air. Mary leads you back toward the city, the glow of its lamps visible in the distance. The tramp of boots fades behind you, but the impression of the soldiers lingers. Their laughter, their discipline, their fierce pride. They are not just defenders of Rome. They are Rome, in all its messy, multicultural glory. And as you step back inside the gates, you can't help but think that somewhere, far off, another unit is doing the same thing, keeping the empire awake through the dark hours. The sun rises on a different kind of bustle today. Instead of soldiers drilling or priests chanting, you hear the rhythmic slap of wet cloth and the chatter of women's voices. Mary steers you toward the Suburra, the neighborhood already humming with industry. And you quickly realize this is no backstreet domestic scene, it's the economic engine of the city at work. The first sight that catches your eye is a team of women bent over tubs, washing tunics with a vigor that would make any modern gym instructor proud. Their hands are raw from lye, their sleeves rolled high, and their conversation is punctuated by laughter and gossip. You might have expected Roman women to be cloistered away, but here they are, earning wages before the forum's first speeches even begin. Mary nudges you toward a nearby taberna, where a woman with gray-streaked hair is barking orders at two slaves and balancing accounts on a wax tablet. "Meet a shopkeeper," Mary says with a satisfied grin. Yes, she owns this place. And yes, her name is on the lease. You blink, realizing that women could hold property, run businesses, and leave inscriptions bragging about their success. The notion feels oddly modern. On the wall is a painted advertisement announcing her prices for wine, bread, and olive oil. The lettering is neat, professional, and most importantly, permanent, an announcement to the whole street that this is her territory. Across the street, another woman emerges from a bakery, her face smudged with flour, holding a tray of hot loaves. She calls out to early customers, and a couple of men stop to buy breakfast. The coins clink into her basket with a satisfying sound. This isn't just pocket money, Mary explains. Some women built entire fortunes this way. We have funerary monuments for freedwomen who proudly listed their trades: perfume sellers, wool merchants, even ship owners. You imagine a woman in a stola standing on a dock shouting at sailors to load faster, and the image delights you. The further you walk, the more examples you see. A midwife hurries by, her bag clinking with bronze instruments. She disappears into a doorway where a family waits anxiously. Next to that house, a school is in session, and you peek inside to see a female teacher guiding children through their recitations. The girls sit alongside the boys, chanting their letters in sing-song voices. Mary whispers that education for girls was more common than we often think, especially among the urban elite. A literate daughter was an asset, she says, not just for marriage prospects but for running household accounts. They said in Thomas Wondowd, for the fact of same. At the corner, a young woman in a clean white robe sits at a tiny shrine, accepting offerings. She is a priestess of Vesta, charged with guarding the sacred flame that keeps the city spiritually safe. The gravity of her expression stops you in your tracks. These Vestals were among the most respected women in Rome, entrusted with state secrets and even able to pardon prisoners with a single touch. The thought sends a little shiver down your spine. Here is a woman whose presence could literally save a man's life. But not all female power was sacred or formal. You stop at a tavern and see a lively scene inside. A woman with bright eyes and jangling bracelets is singing to a crowd of men, passing a cup from hand to hand as they cheer. She is clearly the life of the party, and you suspect she is also the owner of the establishment. Mary nods knowingly. Entertainment was one of the few professions where women could make a fortune and a reputation, though not always a respectable one. The line between celebrated performer and scandalous courtesan was razor thin. And yet many women walked it successfully, carving out space for themselves in a society that liked to pretend it was male-dominated. Around midday, you find yourself in the forum itself, watching a woman present a legal petition. She stands straight-backed, her hair pinned neatly, speaking clearly to the magistrate. The crowd listens, some with curiosity, others with annoyance, but no one stops her. Mary tells you that Roman law allowed women to represent themselves, and inscriptions survive from women who sponsored public works or made charitable donations to their communities. The image of the silent Roman matron, she says, is only half the story. And we can sell of hem to main being right. You duck into a workshop where women sit spinning wool, their fingers flying. The room smells of lanolin and warm bodies, and the sound of whirring spindles is almost hypnotic. One of the workers glances up and smiles before going back to her work. Mary points out that this kind of industry was crucial to the Roman economy. Textiles were a massive business, and much of it was managed or at least staffed by women. Wealthy ladies might have supervised entire teams of spinners and weavers, earning enough to endow temples or build public fountains. As you step back outside, a parade of women passes by, some carrying baskets on their heads, others leading donkeys laden with vegetables. The sight reminds you that the city's daily survival, its bread, its oil, its clothes depended as much on these women as on any senator making a speech. You pause, imagining what would happen if they all went on strike for a single day. The city, you realize, would grind to a halt. Mary leads you up to a quiet hill overlooking the city, where a line of tombs stands in the fading light. You read inscriptions, praising wives, mothers, and business partners. One epitaph makes you smile. It calls the deceased woman a friend to all, a shrewd negotiator, and an honest moneylender. Another boasts that the departed funded a public banquet for the poor. These are not nameless figures, they are individuals who left their mark on the living world. As night falls, you walk past one last scene. A group of women gathered around a brazier, chatting softly as they mend clothes. The glow of the fire lights their faces, and their conversation drifts between children, politics, and the price of grain. It strikes you that you are hearing the same topics that might fill a modern cafe or group chat. Historians still wrestle with the question of how much power Roman women really had, but standing here, you sense that their influence was everywhere, woven into the fabric of daily life. Mary smiles as you both turn back toward the city center. If you only look at statues of emperors, she says, you'll miss half the empire. These women were its heartbeat. And as you drift back through the lamplit streets, you can almost hear that heartbeat, steady and strong, keeping pace with the city itself. You awaken to the sound of hammering not from a soldier's forge or a builder's site, but from a workshop already alive with activity before dawn. Mary motions for you to follow her down a narrow alley, where the glow of oil lamps spills out from open doorways. Inside, men and women are at work, shaping bronze, weaving cloth, baking bread, grinding grain. Some are chained, some are not, but all are clearly enslaved. The air is heavy with sweat, soot, and the faint tang of iron, and you feel a tightening in your chest. This, Mary says gravely, was the other backbone of Rome. You expected something more brutal: iron collars, whips, but what you see instead is grimly efficient industry. A young man stirs a vat of garum, the fish sauce so prized by Roman diners, his hands moving mechanically. A girl no older than 12 carries a tray of bread loaves to the counter, her bare feet silent on the floor. These are not prisoners of war in chains, but domestic, agricultural, and industrial workers who make sure the city runs. Mary points out that Roman slavery was complex. Some slaves were indeed captured in conquest. Others were born into servitude, and still others sold themselves into bondage to pay debts. The result was an empire whose population may have been 1/3 enslaved at its height. An astonishing statistic that makes you glance uneasily at every passerby, wondering who is free and who is not. Mary leads you toward a public building with an inscription carved proudly into the stone. It commemorates a man named Tiberius Claudius Dionysius, who funded a set of public baths. The words Libertas are carved right after his name. He was a freedman. You stare at the stone a little longer, surprised that someone once enslaved could rise to such public prominence. Mary smiles knowingly. This is what fascinates me, she says. In Rome, freedom wasn't just a dream, it was a possible outcome. Freedmen could build businesses, own property, even hold civic offices in some cases. You walk through a cemetery, where the gravestones tell these stories in heartbreaking detail. One monument shows a husband and wife holding hands, the inscription proudly declaring that they were freed together and went on to run a bakery. Another features a sculpted bust of a woman, her hair carefully styled, her epitaph calling her most diligent wool worker and loyal companion. It's clear that many freed people wanted to broadcast their success, to prove that they had transcended the shadow of slavery. But not all stories are happy ones. In the Forum, you overhear a pair of citizens sneering about a newly freed upstart who dresses above his station. The insult stings, even though it isn't directed at you. Mary points out that Roman social mobility was real, but always came with suspicion. The elite were terrified of blurred lines, she says. A rich freedman was a reminder that birth wasn't destiny, and that made senators nervous. You duck into a small shrine maintained by the Collegium Libertorum, an association of freedmen. The air is warm with incense, and the walls are painted with scenes of banquets, where men recline on couches, drinking wine. At first you think they are celebrating some festival, but Mary tells you these gatherings were as much about networking as worship. Freedmen formed clubs, funded feasts, and helped each other climb higher, she says. They weren't just grateful, they were ambitious. In a nearby workshop, you watch a slave carefully copying a manuscript under the supervision of a teacher. His handwriting is elegant, his concentration fierce. When he finishes, the overseer pats him on the shoulder, an oddly human gesture, and sets him on the next task. Mary whispers that literate slaves were often more valuable than unskilled ones, sometimes earning their freedom through their skills. The irony is bitter. The man might one day buy his liberty with the very books he was forced to copy. The day grows hot, and you step into the shade of a portico, where a slave market is underway. The sight stops you cold. Men stand on a raised platform while buyers inspect their teeth and muscles, bargaining with the auctioneer. One boy is turned around so the crowd can see the brand on his shoulder, proof of ownership. The sound of haggling echoes against the marble walls, mingling with the boy's frightened breathing. You feel queasy, but Mary doesn't look away. This was a fact of life, she says quietly. Rome depended on it. But the very existence of this market also meant that freedom was imagined as a real, tangible goal, because someone could, and often did, buy their way out. As the afternoon wanes, you find yourself in a tavern frequented by freedmen. They sit at tables, loud and merry, drinking watered wine and talking business. One man boasts that his son is studying rhetoric and will soon run for local office. Another brags about the number of slaves he now owns, a cruel irony not lost on you. Mary notes that some freedmen embrace the system fully, becoming slave owners themselves. The cycle could be brutal, she says, but also strangely pragmatic. For many, owning slaves was the ultimate proof that they had arrived. What is Amaston Ranger? You walk home through the evening streets, the lamps casting long shadows. Everywhere you look, you see traces of this dual-world: slaves carrying goods, freedmen giving orders, citizens ignoring both as they gossip about politics. The system seems both stable and precarious, a delicate balance of dependence and aspiration. Scholars still argue whether Rome's reliance on slavery helped it thrive or eventually weakened it by discouraging technological innovation. The question hangs in the air, like the smell of smoke from the hearths. Before you turn in, Mary takes you past one last monument, a towering arch decorated with scenes of conquest. At the bottom, tiny figures of chained captives march in a procession, their faces carved with eerie realism. You feel a chill, realizing that this is both propaganda and prophecy. Today's captive could be tomorrow's freedman, or even a citizen. Rome, it seems, had a strange way of swallowing its enemies and making them part of itself. As night falls, you hear distant singing slaves in some household chanting as they prepare the evening meal. The sound is soft, almost lullaby-like, and it follows you as you drift back toward your lodging. For all the brutality of the system, there is a thread of hope running through it, like a faint melody promising that freedom might come, if not today, then perhaps tomorrow. The morning opens with a crowd gathering outside a magistrate's office, and you immediately sense something ceremonial is about to happen. Mary beckons you to the edge of the group, her eyes sparkling. "You're about to witness one of Rome's most remarkable tricks," she whispers. "Watch closely, this is how strangers become Romans." The smell of laurel leaves and lamp oil fills the air as a magistrate in a white toga steps forward, carrying a scroll. Beside him stands a man with weathered skin and a soldier's bearing. His tunic dyed a deep provincial red. His family waits nervously behind him, wife clutching a toddler, teenage son fiddling with a bronze amulet. The magistrate reads aloud a short declaration in crisp Latin, and with a flourish of the pen, the man is proclaimed a Roman citizen. The crowd cheers, the man grins sheepishly, and you realize you've just watched an identity shift in real time. Mary leans closer. "That man probably spent 25 years in the Auxilia," she explains. "He served at the edges of the empire, eaten his share of army gruel, and now he and his children are Roman in the eyes of the law." You glance at the boy with the amulet and wonder what it feels like to wake up one morning, a provincial outsider, and go to bed with the rights to marry, vote, at least in theory, and wear the toga virilis. The ceremony is over in minutes, but its impact stretches across generations. As you follow Mary through the forum, she explains that Rome was unique among empires in its generosity with citizenship. Where other powers jealously guarded their status, Rome treated citizenship like a tool of statecraft, expanding it steadily. Whole communities were granted the right after demonstrating loyalty or, just as often, after being conquered and pacified. You stop at a plaque listing names of new citizens added after a census, and the variety strikes you. Iberian names, Gallic names, even Greek ones. Rome wasn't just absorbing land, it was absorbing people, reshaping them from foreigners into Romans. You duck into a basilica where a group of petitioners is waiting for an audience with a magistrate. One man is clutching a wax tablet inscribed with his father's manumission papers, proof that he is a freedman's son and therefore automatically a citizen. He holds it like a passport, his fingers leaving nervous smudges in the wax. Another man wears a torque around his neck, marking him as once a tribal warrior from Gaul. But his speech is careful, polished, as though he's practiced Roman pronunciation for months. You can feel the ambition radiating off him. Outside again, you stop near a statue of the Emperor Caracalla, whose scowling marble face seems to glare down at you. Mary tells you that in 212 CE, Caracalla issued the Constitutio Antoniniana, a sweeping edict that extended citizenship to nearly every free person in the empire. Overnight, she says, millions of people went from outsiders to insiders. Historians still debate whether this was a brilliant move to unify the empire or a desperate cash grab to expand the tax base. You grin at the thought of provincial taxpayers groaning as they opened the imperial mail, realizing that their new citizenship also meant new obligations. You wander into a tavern at midday, where a lively debate is underway. Two men, one from Africa Proconsularis, the other from a town near the Danube, are arguing over whose local god deserves a new temple in Rome. Both are speaking in Latin, gesturing animatedly, and when the argument grows too heated, the owner jokingly tells them to settle it like Romans with dice. The men laugh and agree, and when the African wins, he declares loudly that Fortuna must be on his side. It hits you that these men, born hundreds of miles apart, are now playing by the same cultural rules, using the same language of jokes, gods, and games. Later in the day, Mary takes you to see a municipal record of names freshly inscribed for local office. A few of the candidates are clearly of provincial origin, their family names newly Romanized. One man proudly lists himself as Marcus Julius, a sure sign that he or his ancestors were granted citizenship under Julius Caesar's reforms. Mary points out that adopting the name of a patron or benefactor was common, a way of tying yourself to the Roman story. It wasn't just paperwork, she says. It was identity engineering. You pause near a fountain to watch a group of children playing. They wear a mix of provincial and Roman-style tunics, but they chant their games in the same Latin rhymes, their bare feet slapping against the pavement. A Greek-speaking grandmother sits nearby, smiling at the scene, and you suspect she's quietly pleased that her grandchildren will grow up as Romans, even if she still dreams in Greek. The sight makes you oddly emotional. It's one thing to see a soldier granted citizenship, another to see the next generation growing up without even questioning that they belong. Mary guides you to a nearby temple, where a ceremony is taking place to enroll new citizens into the local tribe, an administrative unit for voting purposes. Each man steps forward, gives his name, and is formally placed on the roll. There's an almost bureaucratic poetry to it, like watching a new file being opened for each human life. The priest sprinkles a little wine on the altar, sealing the contract between man and state. You find yourself marveling at how Rome managed to scale this system across continents, recording names from Spain to Syria. As dusk falls, you sit with Mary on the steps of a portico and watch the city breathe. People stream past you, citizens born, citizens made, and those who still wait for the chance. You notice a group of foreign traders lingering at the edge of the forum, their faces a mixture of awe and calculation. They must be wondering how long it will take before they, too, are part of this great machine. Mary follows your gaze. That was Rome's genius, she says softly. It didn't just conquer, it converted. Not by force alone, but by offering a share in the prize. Nod cheese. Were God of safe? No. Scholars still argue whether this openness made Rome stronger or diluted what it meant to be Roman. Some claim that citizenship became meaningless once everyone had it. Others insist it was the secret ingredient that kept the empire from splintering sooner. You lean back against the cool stone and imagine the map of the empire, glowing with all those newly minted citizens, tiny lights spreading outward like a constellation. As night deepens, you pass one final scene before heading home. A freedman proudly escorting his son, now of age, to a banquet. The boy's hair is carefully oiled, his tunic freshly washed, and he glances at his father with a mix of pride and nervousness. You can almost hear him thinking, I am Roman now. This city belongs to me too. The thought warms you as much as the torchlight, and you walk back through the lamplit streets, feeling that you've just watched Rome expand, not through war, but through welcome. The next morning greets you with a smell that is far from the simple bread and olive oil breakfast you've grown used to. Today, the air is thick with spice, sharp pepper, sweet cinnamon, and a tangy something you can't quite name. Mary grins knowingly and gestures for you to follow the scent down a winding alley toward a bustling market. What you find there is less a neighborhood food bazaar and more a sensory map of the known world. Barrels of Egyptian grain sit next to heaps of figs from Syria. Amphorae of wine from Gaul are stacked beside baskets of dates from the North African coast. Welcome to the Roman pantry, Mary says, where your dinner could have started its journey 1,000 miles away. It always formato. Before there's... At the fishmonger's stall, you watch a worker open a jar of garum, that infamous fermented fish sauce, and the smell nearly knocks you back a step. He laughs at your expression and scoops a drop on a piece of bread for you to try. The taste is salty, pungent, surprisingly addictive. No wonder Romans used it on everything. Most of this, Mary points out, was shipped in from Spain. Factories there turned entire harbors into fish sauce production centers. The thought of entire coastlines dedicated to filling Roman dinner tables makes you realize how global this empire really was. As you move deeper into the market, the offerings grow more exotic. You see pepper from India, measured out like precious dust, saffron threads from Anatolia gleaming like captured sunlight, and sesame oil from the Levant glistening in clay jars. One vendor shows you dried ginger root, boasting that it came overland from beyond the Persian Gulf. Spices were a status symbol, Mary says. To sprinkle pepper on your meal was to remind your guests that your purse could reach across deserts and seas. You stop at a butcher's stall, where cuts of pork, beef, and lamb hang from hooks, flies buzzing lazily. But what grabs your attention is a crate of strange, scaly birds' peacocks destined for the table of some wealthy host. The butcher explains with pride that his last shipment of ostrich meat came all the way from Africa. Mary raises her eyebrows and admits that some Romans turned dining into theater, serving flamingo tongues or dormice stuffed with honey just to shock their guests. The image is equal parts absurd and fascinating. You picture an aristocrat leaning back on a couch, smirking as his dinner companions whisper in amazement at the culinary spectacle. At midday, you join Mary in a popina, a Roman tavern where laborers and travelers grab quick meals. The room smells of lentil stew and cheap wine, and the menu chalked on the wall lists dishes like barley porridge, sausage, and boiled cabbage. You order a bowl of chickpeas seasoned with coriander and vinegar, and the taste is earthy, satisfying, humble. Mary reminds you that while the elite could afford spice-roots luxuries, the ordinary citizen still relied on the basic grain dole to survive. Bread was political, she says. The city made sure its population was fed because a hungry mob is an angry mob. Then like-sided of this often now, to might or not have so parent for the posant. You step back into the street just as a convoy of carts rattles past, loaded with sacks of grain. Mary points out the official stamp of the Annona, the state grain supply. That came from Egypt, she explains. If those ships didn't arrive, this city could starve. The thought sends a chill through you. Rome may seem invincible, but you begin to see how fragile it was, its survival tied to distant harvests and unpredictable seas. Later in the afternoon, Mary takes you to the riverside warehouses. Inside, the air is cool and smells faintly of spices and dust. Stacked amphorae of olive oil rise like clay towers, each one stamped with a maker's mark. You run your hand along the rim of one and feel the slight indentation where a worker pressed his seal. It's a strange intimacy touching the same surface some provincial craftsman touched before this jar made its way to the capital. As the sun sets, you are invited to dine at a wealthy merchant's house. You recline on a couch in the triclinium while slaves bring dish after dish. Oysters from the coast, roasted kid drizzled with honey, a salad of imported cucumbers, even a dessert of spiced dates stuffed with nuts. The wine flows freely, chilled with snow brought down from the Apennines. Dinner was performance art, Mary whispers as the host gestures dramatically toward the dishes. It wasn't just about feeding the stomach, it was about showing the world you could command flavors from the edges of the map. And I want to do all. Between courses, a musician plays a soft tune on a lyre, and the host boasts of his trade network stretching from Britain to Alexandria. The other guests nod appreciatively, and you suddenly realize that this meal is not just food, but a statement. I control the roads, the ships, the markets that keep this empire humming. You sip your wine and think about how every bite ties you to farmers, sailors, merchants, and moneylenders scattered across 3 continents. When the banquet finally ends, you step out into the night air, your head spinning slightly from the wine. The smells of the city have changed. Now you catch roasting chestnuts from a street vendor, the faint perfume of spiced cakes, the salt tang of the Tiber nearby. You pause to watch a poor family sitting together, sharing a loaf of bread and a bowl of olives. Their meal is simple, but their laughter rings out across the street. You realize that Rome's global dinner table had many tiers, from gilded couches to rough paving stones, yet all were linked by the same invisible web of trade. Historians still debate whether this vast economic network was sustainable or a ticking time bomb. Did Rome create a golden age of interconnected prosperity, or did it become so dependent on imports that the whole system was doomed to collapse when trouble came? The question lingers as you walk home through the lamplit streets. You pass a spice seller closing shop, sweeping up stray grains of pepper like they were gold dust, and you find yourself oddly protective of the scene, as though keeping this market alive might keep the empire alive too. Back at your lodging, you lie down and listen to the distant sounds of wagons unloading late-night shipments at the river docks. Somewhere a baker is already kneading tomorrow's bread, ready to feed a city that cannot go a day without its grain. The empire, you realize, is always hungry and always reaching farther to feed itself. You wake to a low rumble, not thunder but something more rhythmic cheering, the kind that rolls like surf over stone walls. Mary grins as you rub your eyes. "Today," she says, "we're going to the games." You follow her through the streets toward the amphitheater, swept along by a tide of excited spectators. The air is electric with anticipation and smells of roasting nuts, sweaty tunics, and damp straw. This isn't just an event. You realize it's the city's beating heart on display. Inside, the amphitheater is colossal, its tiers rising like the sides of a stone bowl. You climb the steps and look around in awe at the crowd. It's a patchwork of humanity. Merchants from Syria, legionaries from Germania, sailors from Egypt, citizens from every corner of Italy. Their accents clash, their tunics vary in color and cut. But today they are united by one thing: spectacle. The roar that greets the opening act makes your chest vibrate. "See," Mary leans in and shouts over the noise. "This is what Rome did best, turning strangers into neighbors, at least for an afternoon." The first event is a mock hunt. Gates creak open, and out rush a pack of animals, deer, boar, even a leopard, that makes the crowd gasp. Hunters with spears dash into the arena, their movements practiced, almost choreographed. You catch the accent of one as he calls out to his companion he's from Numidia. Mary tells you, a specialist brought to Rome precisely for his skill in handling wild beasts. You find yourself marveling at the logistics. These animals have been captured, shipped, and staged here just to thrill a city hungry for novelty. When the hunt ends, workers quickly rake the sand smooth, and a troupe of performers takes the stage. They juggle, tumble, and sing bawdy songs, and you notice the jokes make even the stern matrons laugh. The lyrics are laced with wordplay that mixes Latin with Greek, proof that the humor was meant to be understood by a diverse audience. Entertainment was the great equalizer, Mary says, still smiling. Everyone here, rich or poor, could laugh at the same punchline. As a result, by midday, the main event begins. Two gladiators stride into the arena, one with a curved Thracian sword, the other with a short gladius and heavy shield. Their armor gleams in the sun, and the crowd goes wild. You feel your pulse quicken as the first clash rings out a sound sharp enough to make your teeth ache. Around you, spectators shout encouragement, some calling the fighters by name. Mary explains that many gladiators were celebrities, their faces sold on little clay oil lamps, their deeds immortalized in graffiti on city walls. "Imagine sports cards," she says, "but bloodier." You can't help but notice that the fighters are not both Roman-born. One has dark curly hair and skin tanned from a desert sun. The other is pale and red-haired, probably from somewhere north of the Alps. Yet here they are, fighting under the same rules, cheered by the same crowd. The thought hits you that the arena is a microcosm of the empire itself, a place where difference is both highlighted and leveled. At one point, the fight pauses, and the crowd collectively leans forward. The referee looks to the editor of the games, who raises his hand, and the decision is made. The defeated gladiator is spared. The roar that erupts is deafening, and you feel the collective relief ripple through the stands. Mary nods. This wasn't just about death, it was about drama, suspense, mercy. It made the whole audience feel like participants. If you have fallen rescinded and of the Sart Rizardi in the Sarf, in the afternoon lull, you follow Mary to the back of the amphitheater, where vendors sell souvenirs, cheap figurines of gladiators, amulets promising luck in the arena, even snacks for the next bout. The smell of honeyed nuts and hot sausages wafts through the air, and you buy a skewer just to taste the moment. A man next to you hums a tune from the morning's performance, and a group of sailors argue good-naturedly about which gladiator will win the next fight. The languages are different, but the energy is shared. You return to your seat, just in time for a naval reenactment, yes, an actual mock sea battle. Workers flood the arena with water while crews scramble into small boats. The crowd erupts as the ships collide, oars flashing in the sun. It's absurdly theatrical, but you can't look away. The fighters shout commands in multiple tongues, and somehow the chaos becomes choreography. Mary remarks that emperors staged these spectacles, not just to entertain, but to remind everyone of Rome's reach, that even the sea itself could be conquered and put on display. As the sun dips low, the final act begins, a grand parade. Exotic animals are led past the crowd, elephants from Africa, camels from Arabia, even a rhinoceros whose hide glows in the torchlight. Dancers from the east perform in shimmering costumes, their anklets ringing like tiny bells. The entire arena feels like a world fair compressed into one afternoon. You glance around and realize that every spectator, no matter where they were born, is watching with the same wide-eyed wonder. When the games finally end, the crowd spills into the streets, still buzzing with excitement. You hear heated debates about the day's results, shouts of victory songs, children reenacting gladiator moves with sticks. The city seems warmer, friendlier, as though the shared spectacle has smoothed over the usual social tensions. Mary turns to you with a knowing smile. This, she says, was Rome's real genius. Not just roads or aqueducts, moments like this, where everyone felt they belonged to something bigger. Historians still argue whether these games kept the peace or merely distracted the masses from deeper problems. Were they a brilliant form of social cohesion or a dangerous opiate, numbing the population while the empire strained at the seams? You let the question hang as you walk back through the twilight streets, the sound of laughter and lingering cheers echoing off the walls. By the time you reach your lodging, the city is glowing with torchlight, and somewhere in the distance you can still hear a vendor hawking leftover sausages. You lie down with the rhythm of the crowd still thrumming in your chest, thinking that perhaps this is what Rome did best of all, turn the whole world into a single, roaring audience. You wake in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps, the soft shuffle of sandals, and the occasional creak of a cart wheel. The city is not asleep, it never really is. Mary appears in the doorway with a lantern, her face lit gold in the gloom. "Come on," she says. "You need to see Rome when most of its respectable citizens are supposed to be snoring." You follow her into the street, and the air is cool, damp with river mist. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks, a baby cries, and a drunk man sings off-key as his friends drag him home. The smell of extinguished hearth fires and stale wine mixes with the sharper tang of freshly baked bread, because even now, bakers are hard at work preparing the day's first loaves. The forum is empty of politicians but full of shadows. You hear a splash where someone is cleaning the stones, the echo of broom bristles on marble. A lamplighter moves from post to post, trimming wicks, and for a moment the place feels almost intimate, like a private courtyard instead of the beating heart of empire. Then you notice a group of muleteers hauling in goods from the countryside, their breath steaming in the night air. The sound of hooves and harnesses jingles like distant bells, and you realize the city's supply chain is always awake, grain, wine, and olive oil arriving at hours when most people are dreaming. Mary leads you down to the river docks, and here the scene is livelier still. Torches flare, illuminating sailors unloading crates of figs, amphorae of oil, sacks of grain. The air smells of wet wood, fish, and sweat, and the noise is constant cries of heave in Latin, Greek curses, the slap of ropes against wood. Dockside taverns are still open, their doors spilling out laughter and music. Inside one, you glimpse sailors drinking watered wine and gambling with knucklebones while a flute player weaves a tune over the din. Ports never sleep, Mary says, because the world never stops sending Rome its tribute. The night also belongs to the less savory elements. You pass a group of watchmen patrolling with short clubs, their shadows long in the torchlight. A pickpocket darts down an alley, pursued by a shouting victim. Somewhere in the dark, you hear a whispered negotiation, whether for smuggled goods or a quiet bribe. You can't tell. The city seems thinner at night, its masks removed, showing you its hungry bones. As dawn approaches, you find yourself in the Suburra again, and the first signs of daily life stir. Prostitutes head home, yawning, their earrings glinting in the gray light. Water carriers fill their buckets from public fountains, splashing noisily. A vegetable seller lays out his wares while still half asleep. You pause to watch a baker's apprentice pull flatbreads from a domed oven, their surfaces blistered and steaming. The smell is so good you almost forget how tired you are. By mid-morning the city has shifted gears entirely. You stand in the forum again, now crowded with advocates, clients, petitioners, and gawkers. The noise is overwhelming. cases argued, gossip traded, vendors shouting prices. You pass a barber giving a customer a shave right there in the open air, soap foam catching the sunlight. The city feels reborn, as if the night never happened. Yet you know now that its heartbeat never stopped, even for a moment. Later, Mary takes you to a cosmopolitan port city, Ostia, the gateway to Rome. The streets are filled with sailors from every corner of the empire, their tattoos and accents marking them as men who have seen storms and wars and faraway temples. The warehouses smell of spices, the taverns of cheap fish stew, and the walls are covered in graffiti advertising shipping guilds and sailors' unions. You find a mosaic on the floor of a public building depicting ships and dolphins, and you smile at the thought that this was a world where the sea was not a distant horizon but a daily reality. In the afternoon, you visit a bath complex where the crowd is a mix of locals and foreigners, their naked bodies gleaming with oil as they gossip and argue. You overhear a merchant boasting about his latest voyage to Alexandria and a woman complaining about the price of saffron. Bathhouses, Mary explains, were the empire's social media, a place to catch up on the latest news, scandals, and rumors while soaking in hot water. You wade into the frigidarium, shivering as the cold water closes around you, and feel suddenly very awake. At sunset, you climb a hill overlooking the port and watch as the last ships of the day slip into harbor, their sails catching the dying light. Fires are lit along the docks, and the city glows, as if the stars have descended to earth. You realize that when night comes, the cycle will begin again. The unloading, the drinking, the gambling, the fighting, the baking. Cities like Ostia and Rome were never really still. They were tides of humanity surging in and out, pulsing with life even in the darkest hours. Historians still argue whether this non-stop motion made Rome stronger or exhausted it over time, burning out its people and its resources. Was this constant activity a sign of prosperity or a warning that the empire was consuming itself too quickly? You let the thought hang in the air as the first stars appear. By the time you return to your lodging, the city is quieting down again, or perhaps simply shifting to another gear. You can still hear distant laughter, a mule braying, the faint beat of music from a tavern. You lie down, staring at the ceiling, and it occurs to you that Rome never truly slept. It merely took turns dreaming through its people, passing the torch from bakers to sailors to politicians to poets, so that at any given moment someone was keeping the empire's fire burning. The morning light spills across a villa courtyard like gold paint, and today Mary has that mischievous glint in her eye that tells you she's about to demolish another one of your tidy assumptions. "Come on," she says. "Time to see what Roman art really looked like." You follow her into an atrium where the floor is a shimmering mosaic of sea creatures, octopus, dolphin, even a ship tossed on stylized waves. The tesserae are so fine they look like brushstrokes, and you crouch down to trace the outlines with your finger. Imported marble, Mary notes casually, cut by Greek craftsmen, laid by North African laborers, depicting a myth from Asia Minor. Roman, yes, but also global. Now as a referred of coffer, you wander into the triclinium, where wall frescoes bloom in color. Gardens with peacocks, painted columns, framing vistas of imaginary seaside palaces. The blues are so deep they seem to swallow you, the reds so vivid they pulse. Mary reminds you that the pigments came from as far as Spain and Egypt, ground from minerals that once glimmered in distant hills. The result is a room that feels like stepping into another reality, one where walls dissolve into borrowed worlds. You try to imagine sitting here for dinner, surrounded by this visual theater, and you realize that even a simple meal would feel like a mythic event. In another room, you find a portrait of the household's matron painted on wood. Her hair is coiled elaborately, her eyes wide and dark, her jewelry rendered in exquisite detail. She looks like she might start talking at any moment. Mary tells you this is part of a tradition that thrived in Roman Egypt, funerary portraits that merged Egyptian burial practice with Greco-Roman artistic style. You stand there transfixed, thinking about how this woman probably spoke Greek at home, Latin in the market, and prayed to Isis in a temple, yet here she is, preserved in a Roman house, a citizen of many worlds. Outside, you follow Mary to a workshop where artisans are carving relief panels. The smell of stone dust hangs in the air. One man chips at a scene of Hercules wrestling a lion, while another is chiseling lotus flowers along the border. You ask about the mix of motifs, and Mary explains that Roman art thrived on appropriation. They didn't just copy, she says. They mixed and matched until it was something new. That's why you can find temples with Egyptian columns standing next to statues of Apollo. It wasn't contradiction, it was collage. You make your way to a public bathhouse, where the walls are covered in mosaics depicting marine life, gods, and decorative swirls. Some figures are unmistakably Greek in style, others more local, even rustic. The result is a cheerful patchwork, less solemn than the villas but no less sophisticated. You notice a depiction of Neptune riding a hippocamp while surrounded by dancing dolphins, and next to it a cheeky little graffiti scrawl that reads, "Felix was here." The past, it seems, never misses a chance to photobomb itself. By midday you are standing in a forum lined with statues, and Mary points out how many of them are copies, Roman reproductions of famous Greek originals. You run your hand over the cool marble of a statue of Venus, and realize that the Romans preserved Greek art on an industrial scale. Without these copies, Mary says, half of what we know about Greek sculpture would be gone. It's a comforting thought. The empire that conquered so much also acted as a library, keeping pieces of the world safe, even if accidentally, for future eyes. You visit a temple where the ceiling is painted with stars on a dark blue background, constellations picked out in gold leaf. You tilt your head back and almost lose your balance, so convincing is the illusion. Mary notes that the Romans borrowed this idea from the Egyptians, who painted tomb ceilings with similar star maps. The world looked bigger when you stepped into these spaces, she says. It made you feel small but also connected. In the afternoon, you head to a sculptor's yard near the edge of the city. Here you see statues in all stages of completion. Some just rough blocks, others nearly finished, their faces emerging like ghosts from stone. You watch a sculptor carefully polish a bust of a man with deep lines in his face and a serious gaze. The realism is striking. You can see the bags under his eyes, the folds of skin around his mouth. Mary tells you that verism, the Roman taste for showing age and imperfection, was a way of proclaiming honesty and gravitas. No Instagram filters here, she quips, and you laugh out loud. Later, you visit a shop selling terracotta figurines, cheap little souvenirs of gods, animals, and heroes. You buy one shaped like a tiny gladiator and feel its rough edges against your palm. Somewhere a child is probably doing the same thing, clutching a figure as a keepsake from a day at the games. This, too, is art not for emperors, but for everyone. As dusk falls, Mary takes you to the outskirts of the city, where catacombs wind beneath the ground. By lamplight, you see painted walls with Christian symbols, Jewish menorahs, and pagan scenes all sharing the same space. It feels less like competition and more like coexistence, as though even underground the artistic language was shared. The thought is strangely moving. You emerge into twilight just as the first stars prick the sky, and the city glows gold against the darkening horizon. You think about all the hands that have shaped what you've seen today: Greek sculptors, Egyptian painters, Roman patrons, freedmen, artisans, enslaved apprentices. The empire's art isn't just Roman. It's a dialogue between worlds, a chorus of voices turned into stone, paint, and mosaic. Historians still debate whether this artistic borrowing was cultural brilliance or simple appropriation, but as you walk back through the streets, you find you don't care which label sticks. What you've seen is beautiful, layered, alive. It's as if the empire left you a gallery without walls, where every street corner is an exhibit and every house a museum. When you finally lie down to sleep, you close your eyes and still see those mosaics glittering behind your eyelids, the dolphins leaping, the goddesses smiling, the portraits staring back across 2,000 years. The city has given you a gift, not just its art, but the sense that you have stepped into a living collage, one that never stops rearranging itself to include new stories, new faces, new colors. You wake to a damp chill that seeps through your cloak, the kind of morning that smells of wet grass and distant smoke. Mary's scarf is wrapped tight as she waves you toward a road that seems to stretch forever. "We're leaving the city today," she says, her breath fogging in the cold air. "Time to see where Rome meets the rest of the world." Soon the cobblestones give way to packed earth, and the city's noise fades behind you, replaced by the crunch of boots and the occasional crow of a far-off rooster. Hours later, you reach a fort on the edge of the empire. Its stone walls rise against a bleak sky, dotted with watchtowers. Soldiers move briskly about, their cloaks snapping in the wind, and you smell wood smoke from their cooking fires. The gates creak open, and you step inside to find a world that feels both Roman and not Roman. The layout is unmistakably military barracks, granaries, a Principia, but the accents you hear are a mixture of Latin, Celtic, and something that might be Germanic. Mary explains that these forts were microcosms of the empire, where local recruits mixed with career soldiers from as far away as Syria or Mauritania. Near the fort's edge, a group of merchants huddle around a cart. Their wares include everything from amphorae of wine to carved wooden charms from local villages. A trader from Gaul gestures animatedly, trying to convince a grizzled centurion to buy a cloak woven from native wool. The bargaining is half in Latin, half in the local tongue, and you watch as a deal is struck with a handshake. Trade, Mary notes, was the unofficial language of the frontier. The army brought security, and that security brought markets. Rather foreigner, of meaning tour, self-reigned. At midday you climb a watchtower and peer out over the wall. The landscape stretches wide rolling hills, forests dark with mist, and in the distance, smoke rising from a settlement. You can almost feel the tension humming in the air. The frontier is alive, not a dead border but a place where goods, stories, and sometimes raiders cross under the cover of night. This wall isn't as solid as it looks, Mary says, her voice low. It's a sieve. People slip through all the time. One self-edition, save Mansur. Later you join a patrol heading out into the countryside. The soldiers are wary, scanning the tree line, but they also stop to chat with a group of locals who have brought milk and cheese to sell. A child shyly offers you a carved toy horse, and you buy it for a few coins. The boy grins, showing a gap-toothed smile, and you wonder whether he will grow up to join the auxilia, trading his tribal life for Roman citizenship. The frontier, you realize, isn't just a military line. It's a place where identities are constantly being renegotiated. By late afternoon, you reach a small vicus, a civilian settlement that has sprung up just outside the fort. Here you find taverns, bathhouses, and smithies, all bustling with activity. Women sell bread from baskets, children chase chickens through the mud, and soldiers sit drinking with locals, swapping jokes. The smell of roasting meat fills the air, mingling with the sharper tang of horse sweat. This place feels alive in a way that is both rough and comforting, like a crossroads inn that never closes. Mary leads you into one of the taverns, where a storyteller holds court by the fire. He recounts tales of local heroes who once fought against Rome, though tonight he spins the story so that the Romans come out looking noble and wise. The crowd laughs and drinks, enjoying the story as much as the wine. Mary leans close and says, "This is how Rome won as much by persuasion as by force. Let the locals tell their stories, but make sure Rome becomes part of the ending." As evening falls, the fort gate is shut, and you stand on the rampart watching torches flare along the wall. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks, answered by a chorus of howls from the forest. The frontier feels both safe and perilous, like standing on the edge of a sleeping beast. Historians still argue whether Rome's walls were meant to keep enemies out or to keep soldiers in discipline as much as defense. You glance at the locked gate and wonder which interpretation feels truer tonight. The next morning, you travel farther north, following the road until it reaches Hadrian's Wall. The site is breathtaking, a ribbon of stone stretching across the landscape, dipping into valleys and climbing over hills. You run your hand along the cold rock, feeling the weight of centuries. On one side lies the Roman province, on the other, the lands Rome never fully conquered. And yet, just as Mary warned, the wall is anything but static. Traders are lined up at the gate, offering furs, honey, and even cattle in exchange for wine, jewelry, and coin. Children slip through with baskets of eggs, soldiers slip out to meet lovers, and in the distance you see smoke from villages that thrive on this constant exchange. By midday, a messenger arrives at the fort with news of a minor skirmish farther west, and the garrison snaps to life. Horses are saddled, orders shouted, shields lifted. The tension reminds you that peace here is always temporary. And yet, even as soldiers march out, the market continues, traders haggling over prices as if the wall were just another marketplace. You end the day sitting by a fire with a group of veterans. Their faces are weathered, their armor dented, their Latin accented but confident. They share stories of places they've served: Africa, the Danube, the East, and one man jokes that he's eaten more foreign bread than Roman. Laughter ripples around the circle. For a moment, you sense the strange intimacy of the frontier. Part military camp, part village, part experiment in multicultural survival. When you finally lie down on a cot, the night is filled with sounds, the distant hoot of an owl, the clink of armor from the watch, the faint murmur of traders still packing their goods. You drift off, realizing that this is the Empire's pulse point, where its reach is tested daily. The frontier isn't just where Rome ends, it's where Rome is constantly being renegotiated, redrawn, and reimagined. You wake to a softer sound than usual, no marching boots, no temple bells, just the faint scrape of a broom on stone. Mary is already leading you toward a quieter quarter of the city, where the grand villas give way to crowded insulae, multi-story apartment blocks leaning precariously over narrow lanes. The air smells of wood smoke, frying onions, and something less pleasant wafting up from the open drains. This, Mary says gently, is where most Romans actually lived. You pass a doorway where a woman is sweeping refuse into the street, her children sitting nearby with hollow eyes, chewing crusts of bread. Upstairs, a baby wails and a voice shouts for silence. The walls are cracked, the plaster flaking, and you can see how fire would have been a constant fear in such cramped quarters. Mary points out that these apartments might house entire extended families in a single room. Privacy, she says, wasn't really part of the deal. She one bows. Had friends examined. You follow her into a dingy courtyard where a man is daubing words onto the wall with red paint. At first you think it's graffiti, then you realize it is graffiti, but not the angry, rebellious kind you might expect. The message is cheerful. A love note to a girl named Livia, praising her dancing. Nearby is a crude sketch of a gladiator with the words, "Celadus makes the girls sigh." You find yourself grinning 2,000 years later. Someone's celebrity crush is still immortalized on a wall. Farther along the alley, you see a different kind of message, a complaint scrawled about a dishonest landlord who raised the rent too high. You could almost call this the ancient Yelp, Mary chuckles. If you were angry enough, you grabbed some paint and told the whole neighborhood. There are also prayers scratched into plaster, appeals to gods for better luck, and even crude jokes that make you snort despite yourself. This is not the history of marble inscriptions and senatorial decrees, this is the city talking back. You stop at a public fountain where women fill buckets, chatting about the price of grain and who was caught stealing bread the day before. A man in tattered clothes approaches and dips a cup into the water, nodding gratefully to the attendant who keeps the fountain flowing. Mary explains that these fountains were lifelines for the poor, and when aqueducts broke or the water supply was cut, riots could break out within hours. Bread and water, she says, were the empire's real currency of peace. As side towels, as the sun climbs, you visit a bakery where the smell of fresh loaves nearly overwhelms you. The baker's slaves turn the millstones while the owner sells hot bread to a line of customers, many of them day laborers hoping to eat before heading to the forum to look for work. A boy near the front of the line clutches a token. Mary explains it's part of the grain dole, proof he's entitled to his share of the public distribution. The boy accepts his loaf with wide eyes and darts away before anyone can snatch it. You sit on the steps of a nearby shrine and watch the street life unfold. A beggar with a wooden leg shakes a tin cup, while a fortune teller sets out her dice and wax tablets. Children chase each other around a cart, shrieking with laughter until a stern matron shouts them down. It is noisy, messy, alive, and very human. Mary leans against a pillar and says, for all its grandeur, Rome was mostly this. Ordinary people doing ordinary things. At midday, you duck into a taberna where laborers eat cheap stew and drink watered wine. The room smells of smoke and garlic, and the walls are covered with graffiti, everything from political slogans to badly drawn caricatures of magistrates. One corner bears a tally of who owes whom drinks, the chalk marks telling a story of small debts and shared nights out. You hear a man boasting that he once dined at his patron's house and tasted pepper for the first time. Another man rolls his eyes and mutters that he'd settle for a decent roof that didn't leak. Mary points out that many of these men are freedmen or the sons of freedmen, clinging to the lower rungs of citizenship. Their lives were precarious. A bad harvest or a missed day's work could mean hunger. And yet, she adds, there is evidence that they also pooled resources, formed guilds, and paid for proper burials for one another. They might have been poor, she says, but they refused to be invisible. As the afternoon wanes, you walk through a cemetery on the edge of the city. Here the tombs are humbler than the grand mausolea of the elite, but no less proud. One stone bears a carving of a shoemaker's tools, another of a fishmonger with his wares. The inscriptions boast of honest work, good marriages, and loyal friendships. You run your fingers over the words and feel an ache in your chest. These are voices speaking across time, insisting that their lives mattered. As dusk falls, the neighborhood grows lively again. The smell of lentil stew drifts from windows. Children play in the streets, and neighbors gather to share gossip. Someone starts strumming a cithara, and soon a little impromptu concert breaks out, laughter echoing between the walls. Despite the hardship, there is joy here, quiet, stubborn joy. Historians still debate how much political power these poor citizens truly had. Were they merely a mob manipulated by bread and circuses, or did their collective presence force emperors and magistrates to take them seriously? As you watch a man carefully paint a slogan urging his neighbors to support a candidate for edile, you suspect the answer lies somewhere in between. Mary leads you back toward the forum as night falls, the lamps glowing softly. You glance back one last time at the insulae, their windows flickering like stars, and feel a pang of respect. The city's greatness wasn't just marble and triumphal arches, it was also the resilience of these cramped rooms and their noisy, opinionated inhabitants. When you finally lie down to sleep, you can still hear the echoes of their voices, laughing, cursing, singing, praying. They have survived 2 millennia in paint, plaster, and carved stone. And tonight they seem close enough to whisper in your ear. Morning arrives with an uneasy stillness, as though the city itself knows something contentious is brewing. Mary beckons you toward the Curia, the Senate House, where a crowd has gathered outside. Voices rise in sharp Latin, the kind meant to be heard and to carry. Inside, senators are debating not grain prices or military campaigns, but religion, specifically the sudden popularity of an imported cult. The words echo from the marble walls like hammer blows. Too many foreigners, strange rites corrupting Roman virtue, the gods of the ancestors being insulted. You glance at Mary, and she smirks ruefully. Sound familiar? She says. Every generation thinks the empire is going to the dogs because of the newcomers. You slip inside just as an elder senator is waving his arms, demanding that a ban be placed on certain Eastern festivals. His colleagues nod, some mutter, a few roll their eyes. The air is thick with tension and a faint smell of sweat politics at work. Mary leans close and explains that this isn't the first time Rome panicked over cultural imports. Remember the Bacchanalia? One Mary, she asks. The Senate thought secret nighttime parties were a threat to the state. They cracked down hard, executed leaders, banned gatherings, yet within decades, Bacchus was back in fashion. You picture toga-clad moralists tearing their hair out, while the city sneaks off to another ecstatic dance ritual and can't help chuckling. Later that day, you find yourself near a temple, where a small protest has broken out. Priests of Jupiter are chanting loudly, denouncing what they call foreign superstitions. Across the square, worshippers of Isis stand quietly, holding lotus flowers and looking defiant. A vendor mutters that the priests are just jealous because the Egyptian cult is drawing bigger crowds. The tension feels modern. 2 groups, both certain of their rightness, glaring at each other across a public space. You catch the smell of incense and sweat and feel your pulse quicken, as if a riot might break out at any moment. Mary leads you away, reminding you that these moments of tension were not always resolved peacefully. She recounts how, after a major fire, Emperor Tiberius briefly banned certain foreign rites, blaming them for angering the gods. But then, in an almost comical reversal, he quietly allowed them again because suppressing them proved more trouble than it was worth. Rome, she says, was pragmatic. Fear would flare up, then fade, because the empire couldn't function without its outsiders. 1. You head toward the Jewish quarter, where signs of this tension are visible in the architecture itself. Synagogues stand discreetly, with no towering columns to call attention. A man invites you inside, where you hear the soft murmur of prayers in Hebrew. The scrolls smell of ink and parchment, the air of olive oil lamps. There is a serenity here, but Mary warns that at times, Jewish communities faced expulsion from the city during moments of unrest. The thought sends a shiver down your spine how precarious life must have felt, always subject to the whims of the powerful. By midday, the forum is buzzing with rumor. Someone claims the emperor is going to expel astrologers. Someone else swears the Senate is debating new taxes on immigrant merchants. The voices blend into a low, anxious hum. You watch a merchant from Syria haggling furiously with a local official over tariffs, both men gesturing wildly but ultimately shaking hands when a compromise is struck. Fear, you realize, could spark negotiation, as often as violence. You stop for lunch at a popina and notice the graffiti scratched into the counter. Some of it praises foreign gladiators, others insult Eastern magicians and accuse them of causing plagues. You trace the letters with your finger, thinking how quickly a community can go from fascination with the exotic to blaming it for every misfortune. Mary sits beside you, sipping watered wine, and muses that Romans were both fascinated and frightened by difference. They wanted to eat Egyptian spices, watch Syrian dancers, pray to Persian gods, but they didn't want to feel like Rome itself was being remade. In the afternoon, you pass a group of philosophers arguing under a portico. One insists that the influx of foreign cults is a sign of decadence. Another claims it proves Rome is strong enough to absorb anything. Their debate draws a small crowd, nodding or jeering as each point lands. You catch yourself thinking that the question isn't so different from modern ones. Does diversity strengthen a society or fracture it? As evening approaches, you visit a shrine to Cybele, the Magna Mater, whose priests sing in a language you don't recognize, accompanied by the eerie sound of flutes and drums. The ritual is intense, almost wild, and you see why it might have unnerved conservative Romans, but the worshippers look rapturous, and for a moment you feel the pull yourself, a sense of being part of something primal and older than the city itself. Historians still dispute whether these moments of moral panic were driven by genuine fear of instability or just by politic senators looking for easy scapegoats to rally public support. Mary suggests it was probably both. Fear is a good motivator, she says, but so is curiosity. That's why the bans never lasted forever. Rome liked to have it both ways. As night falls, you see torches lit around the forum, where a festival is beginning despite all the grumbling. Dancers whirl. Musicians play. Vendors shout about wine and roasted chestnuts. Whatever tension filled the air this morning seems to melt into laughter and song. The city might fear change, but it also can't resist it. You sit on the steps with Mary, watching strangers and locals dance side by side under the torchlight. The music is foreign, the rhythms intoxicating, but the joy is universal. When you finally make your way home, the streets are still humming with life. You pass a wall where someone has scratched a simple message. Roma Eterna. Eternal Rome. You wonder if the writer meant it as a reassurance or a defiance, maybe both. As you lie down, the voices of the day still echo in your ears, senators shouting, priests chanting, merchants haggling, dancers laughing. Rome feared being changed, but it also thrived on change, like a fire that feeds on every new offering thrown into it. The night seems to hold its breath, waiting for the next argument, the next festival, the next flare of fear, and you know the city will meet them all in stride. The morning dawns gray and heavy, as if even the sky knows what's coming. Mary meets you at the steps of a temple, her usual wry smile absent. Today, she says, we find out what happens when this great machine begins to shake. The first sign is the smell sharp and sour, like spoiled grain. You follow her toward the granaries and find a restless crowd gathered, muttering angrily. The doors are locked, guards posted with spears crossed. Bad harvest, Mary explains grimly, and maybe a bad shipment from Egypt. The grain supply's been delayed. We jerkin to resord. The tension builds as the morning goes on. A man in the crowd shouts that the emperor is hoarding grain for the army. Another claims the Senate has diverted the supply to bribe voters. The air grows thick with anger, and soon the first stone flies. You duck as the crowd surges forward, pounding on the granary gates. The guards shout, their shields rattling, and for a terrifying moment you think you're about to see blood spilled. Then an official arrives, scroll in hand, and announces that emergency grain will be distributed tomorrow at the Circus Maximus. The crowd slowly disperses, still grumbling but calmer now. Mary exhales. Bread was never just food, she says. It was the empire's pressure valve. This one's to forewhale and order first a prias. But famine isn't the only crisis that could shake Rome. Later that day, you are led to a street where the smell of smoke and pitch still lingers. Blackened ruins gape where shops once stood. Children pick through the ashes for salvageable scraps. Fires were constant, Mary explains. And when they hit, they revealed just how fragile urban life could be. You imagine the panic of the night before, the flames leaping from roof to roof, families running with what little they could carry. Rome might be the capital of the world, but it is built of wood and lives on a knife edge. In the afternoon, the sound that reaches your ears is not shouting but coughing. You follow Mary to a makeshift infirmary, where rows of sick lie on pallets, their faces pale, their lips cracked. The smell of fever hot, metallic hangs in the air. A physician moves from bed to bed, his hands stained with wine he uses as antiseptic. Mary lowers her voice. Plagues came through often. Measles, smallpox, maybe worse, sometimes entire neighborhoods emptied. You stand frozen as you realize that the very trade networks that brought Rome pepper and silk also brought invisible passengers that could kill tens of thousands. That night, you sit by a brazier with a group of survivors, listening to their stories. One man swears the gods are angry, another claims it was foreign sorcery, and a third shrugs and says the world just has its cycles. Mary muses that we still argue about what exactly struck Rome in its worst outbreaks, whether it was plague or something unnamed, but whatever it was, it left mass graves and a permanent scar on the city's memory. The next morning brings yet another test, not disease this time, but fear from beyond the frontiers. A messenger rides in with news of an incursion by barbarian tribes. The forum buzzes with panic, senators arguing over whether to send more troops north or negotiate. You watch a mother clutch her child, whispering about the possibility of war reaching the city. The thought of Rome itself under siege feels almost impossible. And yet Mary reminds you that it happened more than once in the late Empire. The unthinkable always seems unthinkable, she says, until it's on your doorstep. By midday, the emperor's herald announces new levies for the army and extra taxes to fund them. The announcement is met with groans, but also with something unexpected cheers from veterans who see this as a chance to restore Roman glory. The crowd is divided, the city vibrating with both dread and pride. You spend the afternoon walking through shrines where people leave frantic offerings, loaves of bread, garlands, little clay figurines of soldiers and gods. The air is thick with incense and desperation. At one altar, a priestess prays aloud for the empire's unity, her voice breaking. You notice how many different kinds of people stand beside her: freedmen, foreigners, soldiers on leave, even senators' wives. For a brief moment, all of them are united in the same plea. When evening falls, you are drawn to a public meeting in a portico where philosophers debate what these disasters mean. One insists the empire is doomed. Another argues that crises are the crucible in which Rome renews itself. The listeners nod, argue, throw coins into the air in approval. Historians still debate whether these moments of strain ultimately strengthened Rome or merely delayed its fall. Mary leads you up the Capitoline Hill for a final view as the city settles under night. Torches flicker, their light reflecting on the Tiber, and you can almost feel the collective breath of the people as they brace for whatever tomorrow brings. Unity, Mary says softly, wasn't a given. It had to be forged again and again, every famine, every plague, every invasion. In this lever, and I know the set offers. As you lie down to rest, the city seems quieter than usual, as if waiting. Somewhere, dogs bark, carts creak, a baby cries, but beneath it all is that subtle hum of an empire holding its breath, daring to believe it will survive one more day. You wake to the sound of a drumbeat that feels different from yesterday's measured order. It's sharper, insistent, almost defiant. Mary's expression is serious as she leads you to the forum, where news has broken that a provincial uprising has flared somewhere far from the capital. The herald reads the announcement with a carefully neutral voice, but the crowd reacts with murmurs of fear and fascination. Rebellion, Mary says softly, was always a risk in a patchwork empire, and yet every rebellion left a mark that changed Rome itself. I see. You set out on the road with her, following the path rebels might have taken. The journey takes you into the countryside, past burnt-out villas, where blackened beams stand like skeletons against the sky. The smell of ash still clings to the air, and you can almost hear the distant echoes of battle, the clash of iron, the shouts of men, the cries of farmers caught in the crossfire. Mary explains that some uprisings were small and local, little more than banditry. Others shook the empire to its core, like Boudicca's revolt in Britain. You imagine the streets of Londinium burning, Roman citizens fleeing, legionaries scrambling to regroup. When you reach a garrison town, the scars of rebellion are still fresh. The gates are patched with new timber. and inside you see soldiers drilling with grim determination. Yet in the market square, life has already resumed. Merchants selling bread, children playing, locals and soldiers haggling together as though nothing happened. It strikes you that Rome's response to rebellion wasn't just suppression, it was integration. After the fight was over, the empire rebuilt the towns, reinstated trade, even granted citizenship to some of those who had once raised swords against it. Rome was pragmatic, Mary says. Better to turn rebels into taxpayers than leave them smoldering forever. This was an end in the martyred, the day for the spence, for the 19th to greater. You visit a shrine just outside the walls, where offerings of both Roman coins and local tribal charms lie side by side. The mix is telling old gods and Roman ones sharing the same altar, a sign of spiritual compromise. The priest greets you in halting Latin, then switches to his native tongue to bless a family who have come to pray. Mary smiles. This is what happens after the dust settles. The empire doesn't erase difference, it layers it. And what thing? In the afternoon, you walk through a recently rebuilt town. Its streets laid out in the neat grid pattern of Roman planning. The forum is new, the baths still smell of fresh plaster, and on the edge of the square stands a statue of the emperor, not towering and stern, but surprisingly approachable, perhaps to remind locals that Rome can be generous as well as fierce. You overhear two elders debating in the shade. One complains about new taxes, the other admits that the paved roads have made getting goods to market easier. Even in their grumbling, you hear reluctant acceptance. You duck into a tavern and share a drink with a pair of locals who fought on opposite sides during the rebellion. Their conversation is animated, occasionally tense, but they drink from the same jug and eventually laugh together. Mary notes that civil wars and uprisings often ended with treaties, pardons, and even marriages meant to knit communities back together. Reconciliation, she says, wasn't just policy, it was survival. As dusk falls, you attend a festival that has been revived after the uprising. Drums pound, dancers whirl, and for a moment it's hard to tell where the old tribal ritual ends and Roman theater begins. The performers wear a mix of native costumes and Roman-style masks, and the crowd is full of both locals and off-duty soldiers. You feel a shiver as you realize you're witnessing a hybrid culture being born before your eyes. Mary leads you to a hilltop to watch the fires from the festival glow like constellations across the valley. Every rebellion, she says, was an opportunity for the empire to reimagine itself. Brutality first, yes, but then compromise, negotiation, a new layer added to the Roman story. You think about how many times this process must have repeated Judea, Gaul, North Africa, each one leaving traces in language, law, architecture, even cuisine. On the road back to the capital, you stop at a milestone that still bears the chisel marks of someone who tried to scratch out the emperor's name. It's been recarved now, the official lettering neat and unyielding, but you run your fingers over the faint scars beneath. Rome may have reasserted itself, but the memory of resistance remains, hidden in the stone. When you return to the city, the forum is abuzz with news that the rebellion has been officially declared over. Senators congratulate each other on their wisdom, merchants celebrate the reopening of trade routes, and priests give thanks to the gods for restored order. Yet, in a side street, you see a group of women singing a lament in a foreign tongue, their voices low and mournful. Mary touches your arm. Not everyone celebrates, she says. Even after Rome wins, the memory of loss lingers. Historians still debate whether Rome's pattern of crushing revolts, but then extending concessions, was brilliant statesmanship or simply a way of kicking the problem down the road. Was it true reconciliation, or just a clever way to prevent future uprisings until the next generation forgot? The question hangs in the air as night settles over the city. You fall asleep to a mixture of sounds, cheers from the forum, drums from a distant victory celebration, and somewhere far off, the faint beat of a morning song. The empire, you realize, is not just one story but many, some triumphant, some bitter, all woven together in a tapestry so tight that no single thread can be pulled without unraveling the whole. The last morning of your journey dawns cool and bright, the sky washed clean after a night of rain. The city glistens, its streets reflecting the first light of day, as though Rome itself is pausing to look in the mirror. Mary stands beside you at the edge of the forum, scarf pulled close, and says quietly, "It's time to ask what all of this added up to." You take a slow breath, realizing that the sights, smells, and voices of the past days have been building toward this moment. She leads you through the forum one more time, and now every monument feels layered with meaning. The rostra, where senators spoke, seems to echo with voices in a dozen accents. The temples no longer look like simple shrines to Roman gods, but like magnets pulling in deities from every province. You notice how many of the statues bear names that are not purely Latin but hybrid, belonging to men and women whose grandparents were once considered outsiders. The city is no longer just Rome, it is a collage of worlds, and you can finally see it clearly. You walk toward the archives where bronze tablets record laws granting citizenship, land rights, and privileges to cities across the empire. Mary runs her hand along one and remarks that some of these names are still the names of European towns today. Proof that the Roman footprint never entirely faded. Even after the empire crumbled, she says, its habits stuck town grids, road networks, legal codes. You nod, thinking of the roads you've walked, the aqueducts you've seen, the fortresses still standing along the frontiers. The infrastructure is as stubborn as the idea behind it, that a single world could be stitched together under one roof. Later, you leave the city with Mary and climb the Janiculum Hill for a wider view. From here you can see the Tiber winding, like a silver ribbon, and the roads stretching out in every direction. It strikes you that those roads are not just for marching legions or shipping grain, they are arteries through which identity itself flowed. The empire was less a static thing, and more a process, constantly pulling new people into its orbit, turning strangers into Romans. In the afternoon, you sit in a quiet courtyard where a philosopher is lecturing a group of students. He speaks of cosmopolitanism, of being a citizen of the world rather than just of Rome. The idea feels radical and yet perfectly Roman. This is the culture that made room for Greeks, Syrians, Spaniards, Berbers, and Celts under one civic identity. You watch the students nod thoughtfully, some scratching notes on wax tablets, others simply staring into the middle distance as though trying to imagine the shape of such a world. Mary takes you next to a warehouse where mosaics have been unearthed showing scenes of daily life, a baker handing bread to a child, a merchant shaking hands with a sailor, a woman spinning wool under a colonnade. The scenes are ordinary, yet they capture exactly what made the empire work, not emperors or conquests, but millions of small interactions between diverse people who learn to live together. You find yourself smiling at a detail in one corner. A cat curled under a table, its tail flicking. Even the animals, it seems, belong to this shared world. As evening falls, you walk through a neighborhood where you see inscriptions left by guilds, carpenters, potters, fullers, often naming patrons who came from distant provinces. These are not grand imperial decrees but humble records, saying in effect, we were here, we worked, we built. Mary reminds you that much of Rome's legacy lies not in its emperors but in the ordinary people who laid stones, carved beams, pressed olives, copied texts. You return to the forum one last time, just as the sky deepens to a royal purple. Torches are being lit, their reflections dancing on the polished stone. The city hums as it always does, vendors calling out their wares, children running underfoot, priests lighting lamps in temples. The scene feels timeless, as though you've stepped outside of history for a moment, and are seeing Rome as it wants to be remembered, eternal, layered, alive. Mary sits beside you on the steps and speaks softly. Rome was never just one thing. It was 1,000 threads woven together, some frayed, some snapped, but most holding fast. Its genius wasn't purity but combination. You think of the soldiers from Africa standing beside those from Gaul, the Egyptian priestesses sharing streets with Jupiter's priests, the mosaic portraits showing faces of every shade. The empire was a patchwork, yes, but a patchwork that somehow made a quilt big enough to cover 3 continents. Historians still debate whether this inclusiveness ultimately saved Rome for as long as it lasted, or whether it blurred its identity to the point of collapse. Was the universal citizenship of Caracalla the high point of Roman genius, or the beginning of its decline? The question is left hanging like a star over the city, and you find yourself oddly grateful that no single answer can settle it. As night closes in, you and Mary leave the forum and walk along the Tiber. The river glimmers with torchlight, and the breeze carries the mingled smells of cooking fires, incense, and wet stone. Somewhere, a musician plays a slow, mournful tune on a flute, and the notes seem to follow you as you climb a final hill. From here, the whole city lies below you, glowing like an ember against the darkness. You stand silently for a long time, letting the sight burn into memory. This is not the Rome of marble monuments and history books. Not the sanitized version of white togas and solemn senators. This is the Rome of diversity, noisy and fragrant, fragile and resilient, full of people who were never supposed to share a destiny but somehow did. Mary looks at you with that half-smile you've come to recognize and says quietly, "You've seen the empire now. You've heard its voices, walked its streets, smelled its markets. The question is, what will you do with it?" You have no answer, only the awareness that something inside you feels stretched wider, as though you have absorbed a little of that Roman habit of collecting the world. And as the last light dies from the sky, you find yourself whispering a thank you, not just to Mary, but to the countless people whose stories made this journey possible. The city below seems to exhale, and you turn back toward your lodging, your steps slow, your mind full. The pacing of your thoughts softens as the night deepens. The noises of the forum fade into a gentle murmur, like waves pulling back from the shore. The smells of smoke and bread become a faint background haze, comforting rather than sharp. You picture the empire's roads stretching into the dark, but now they seem less like lines of conquest and more like threads tying distant lives together. Every soldier, merchant, slave, and freedman you've seen is part of a vast tapestry, and in your mind you run your fingers over the weave, feeling the roughness, the smoothness, the frayed edges. Your breathing slows as you imagine the glow of lamplight in 10,000 windows, each one a tiny star. The empire is quiet now, not because it has stopped, but because it has settled, like a great animal at rest. You picture the Tiber flowing steadily under the moon, carrying away the dust of the day but promising to return it tomorrow. Rome sleeps, but not completely. It dreams, and you are part of that dream now. The stars above seem to draw closer, as if the night sky is lowering a velvet curtain. The sounds become softer. A single dog barking far away, the faint pluck of a lyre, the whisper of wind through cypress trees. Your eyelids grow heavy, but in the darkness behind them you still see the mosaics, the faces, the roads, the markets. They are no longer noisy or overwhelming, they are calm, like stones warmed by the sun. And so you let yourself sink into that warmth, into the quiet knowledge that the empire, for all its chaos, held together long enough to leave you this story. It was flawed, it was messy, but it was also magnificent, and tonight, under the stars, you can let it rest.